4 civilian positions. The department is organized. We have myself and a commander that are administrative staff. And then we have a lieutenant that's in charge of our patrol operations. We have 4 sergeants that run our patrol operations. And then we have a K-9 officer and we have a traffic officer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chief Creager, how about Broomfield?
So Broomfield is one of 2 combined city and counties in the state of Colorado, us and Denver. However, unlike Denver, we do not break the police department up and do a sheriff's department and a police department. So both sets of duties, municipal policing and the statutory requirements of a sheriff are all under me. We have 184 officers, I believe, about 240 people overall. I have 2 deputy chiefs. One runs the operational side of the police department, patrol investigations, those kinds, traffic and those kinds of units. The other one is the support services bureau. It would be the detention center, dispatch, court security, those types of things. We have, I think, 11 commanders, about 22 sergeants, and then all the other sworn personnel underneath that leadership.
Wow, okay. So let me ask you about something. I know Larimer County has been doing this, and I'm not sure if Broomfield is. I think you are. But do you do ride-alongs ever since 2017 for elected officials or public servants? Do you offer those so that they can see firsthand what it's like for a law enforcement officer on duty?
So we did even, we do, and we actually, in non-COVID times, offer them to any member that lives in our community. They can sign up to do a ride-along. But we did an immersion program with our council where we brought them in, put them through a number of the different kinds of trainings that our officers go through. We stress de-escalation in all incidents where that even is a possibility. We put them through a number of scenarios where they had to use de-escalation and other tools to try and resolve the situation, and really just took 3 days just to orient them with the operations of the police department, the challenges officers face, and you know, the difficulties that come up on calls for service in dealing with citizens in our community. So it was hugely valuable.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I think that I could learn a lot from doing something like that. Okay, so our next question is, how has policing changed since you started? So I'll let Chief Phillips go first.
Well, I started back in 1982.
Wow.
And back then, we didn't have laptop computers or a lot of the technology that we have today. So I've seen technology really grow in the profession over the years. So I would say that's probably the biggest change that I've seen. But I've also seen a lot of policing going from more of the traditional, we only respond to crimes, to where the role of the police officer is much more diverse now. We have to respond to calls of, say, someone having a problem finding housing. We respond to homeless people. I mean, there's the types of calls for service that we have are a lot more involved now than they used to be. So I would say those are the 2 biggest changes I've seen in my career.
Do you feel that the technology has been helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I wish I would have had it back when I started.
So I didn't know that you get called out on these different calls like housing and homeless, and because I know that police officers are dealing with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, domestic violence, things like that. So okay, so yeah, thank you for adding that. Chief Creager.
So, wow, Chief Phillips, he's been doing this a long time. I started late in 1982, so much after Chief Phillips. And I would echo what he has said. I mean, the complexity of the job, not only in the equipment and the expectations and the calls for service, but just the complexity of the various paths the officer must follow, you know, whether it be legal paths or social paths or expectations of the community. It's a very complicated job. I always tell people that when we have an officer resign, to get that position replaced, and that's actually back working on the street, it takes us anywhere from 12 to 16 months to get the officer hired and trained. So we have a huge investment in our officers to make sure they are trained when they hit the street, and then the amount of training that we provide them every single year is staggering. It takes, I have an entire training unit to keep the schedule going to make sure we get every officer into their training, yet still have people that are actually responding to the calls for service. And just the overall complexity of the job and the talent it takes to successfully navigate through that career is amazing to me. I'm always just amazed by the quality of people, especially young people, that we have coming into this profession.
Thank you both. Our next question is, what makes a good police chief?
I'll let Chief Creager handle that one.
Well, you'll have to answer that as well.
You know, I think a good police chief is really got is in three arenas all the time, and that's you have your finger on the pulse of the organization. What's your culture? What is the expectations of the organizations? How are officers responding? Are you addressing issues when they come up immediately so they don't continue and escalate? So you're always you have to be very attentive to your organization and the people within your organization. On the other hand, you have to be very involved in the community. Policing should, you know, we all do the same thing in policing, but the way we do it and how we do it can vary a little bit, and it's really predicated on community expectations. So you really want to have a very clear understanding of the evolution of community expectations for what their police do, because after all, they're the ones that hire us and pay us, and they're the ones who we serve. And then also, you know, the political side too, which these are the elected officials by their constituents, and so having that having a real close relationship with your elected officials so they understand not only what direction the organization is going and what its challenges are, but also understanding from their point of view what their expectations are of your organization, and it's a constant balance. And I think having the wherewithal and the experience to continually balance those and making sure you are providing the police services to your community from that well-rounded standpoint is the key to being a successful police chief.
So basically what you're saying is that you have to establish these relationships with all these different levels. So including the community, establishing that trust, establishing that support, but then also establish those relationships with your legislators, and in your situation, not only the state legislature, maybe the state, but also your Broomfield Council.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Chief Phillips?
Got back around to me.
You're doing amazing. You're doing great.
I think the job of a police chief in a smaller agency like Johnstown is probably a little bit more intimate than it would be with a larger agency. I did most of my career in a large department in South Florida, and I only talked to my chief once in 20 years. Here, I have the luxury of having that one-on-one contact every day with our officers. And Chief Creager talked a little bit about setting that culture and monitoring the culture of an agency. When you have that kind of contact, that daily contact, I have the ability to constantly and consistently make sure that the message that I want, that provides that direction for the culture of the agency, that it's heard every day and it's heard from me. Gives me that opportunity to have those discussions. And in turn, being in a smaller agency, I have the ability and the opportunity to listen. And I think when I first became a chief about 15 years ago at another department, I was a brand new police chief. And I had that mentality that it's my way or the highway, that I'm going to set policies, let's go. And once I grew into the position a little bit more and had a lot of interactions with other chiefs that had been serving for a long time and listening and getting that mentorship, I realized how important it was to listen to the officers. You can't just put your philosophies and your beliefs down. You have to listen to what is coming back up. I'm very fortunate in being in a smaller agency that I have the time to do that. Politically, the relationships I have with my council, they make me feel very comfortable. We talk after the council meetings. They know they can call me or send me an email and talk about anything they want to talk about. And we have. I've had council members come out and do ride-alongs with our officers. It's just that kind of personal one-on-one relationship where I'm listening to what the council is trying to push as far as what they want for the community, and I know that's based on that interaction they have with their constituents. So that message is coming quickly from them, and I can get that out to the officers, and it makes that community interaction, the community expectations, it just makes the whole process so simplified that we don't have time really to lose sight of what the community expects from us. So I think that's a big advantage for us being such a small agency.
Yeah, that's what I love about having both of you on, because we're seeing through the lens of a smaller community police department, but also a bigger community police department too in my district. So I do appreciate both of your perspectives, and I think it's important that the community sees it through your lens as well, right? And then we can understand, and we know what questions may arise or what are our concerns and what have you. Okay, so thank you. And now I want to go into a little bit about 217. So, and this is to both of you, and I'll let Chief Phillips go first. So are you optimistic, or do you feel pessimistic about the current conversation on policing?
Again, I have a level. I was fortunate when Senate Bill 217 came out. Other than tracking the contacts that the officers have to capture that data as far as our contacts, as far to prove whether or not there's any racial profiling going on. That was the only piece of that bill that we didn't currently already have in place. We had our body cameras in place. Our policies and procedures, I had to change. The only thing I had to change in my policy and procedure was I made mine more restrictive on the reporting requirement as far as the officers that were involved in that use of force.
You're cutting out. Your audio is cutting out.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The only thing that I really had to change in our policy was that reporting requirement, and all I did was I believe 217 mandated a 10-day reporting requirement. We dropped ours to 24 hours.
Oh, great.
Small agency, we don't need 10 days to report. So our body cameras are in place. Our officers, all of our officers receive crisis intervention training. Everything in 217 we were already doing. There was that apprehension, if you will, by the officers when they found out about the liability component, where the loss of qualified immunity. But our council and our town manager voiced their support for the officers. And I've told my officers since I've been here, if you act within our policies and procedures and you make a mistake of the heart, then, we're going to back you. If you go against our policies and procedures and you make a mistake of the head, then you're going to suffer the consequences that you brought on yourself. So our officers have already been there, and then to have our counsel and our manager come forward and say, hey, we're going to support and reinforce that message that I've been giving them. The apprehension went away. So it really wasn't a big impact on our agency. And I've always been on the mindset that if there's anything that we can do better, we shouldn't be afraid of those conversations. So, as long as both sides are at the table, both
Yeah.
sides are listened to, and that I don't see any problem with having those discussions. That's
I really appreciate that. I mean, I live in Johnstown. You're my police department. And so I have to tell you, I really appreciate that because, I think a lot of people don't know the different intricacies of how, it's your procedures, your process. I mean, I had a lot of people who live in our town were very concerned with 217.
Yeah.
And so it's very, I know for me, I love the fact that you were able to talk with, the council, you were able to talk with your officers. And I think that because, there's support there and there's conversations,
Yeah.
and there's also accountability, right?
Absolutely.
It's transparency. I think that's important. And I think that, knowing that as a community member, I really appreciate that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Chief Creager?
Well, I'd agree with a lot of what Chief Phillips have to say. We always refer to it as SB 217, which is the Senate bill that led to what it is today, which is Colorado law. And as law enforcement officers, we are obligated to work under or within the Colorado law. So we have been working very diligently to make sure that all of our policies and procedures meet the standards set by Colorado law. That wasn't a big change for us either, but there was a few pieces in there that I wanted to make sure the wording was exactly like in use of force. Our use of force policy, and we use very little force as a general rule too, but it requires that for example, that only the force used consistent with minimization of injuries. We didn't use that term minimization of injuries. We would use terms like only a force necessary to get somebody under control. There could be argued to be synonymous, but because of the Colorado state law, I want the officers to have that in their policy. And then we went back and trained every single officer on use of force again, just to make sure they had the policy and the training to go along to make sure they are compliant with state law. Body cameras we've had, so that really wasn't a big issue with us. We already teach de-escalation and all skills training, although we're bringing a skills platform here for the next year to enhance their knowledge of that. And we're going to host a PERF, which is the Police Executive Research Forum. We're going to host a statewide train the trainer for their platform for any police department that wants to use that. As we've gone through to, SB 217, there are a couple areas that we're going to be seeking some clarity from the Attorney General and possibly from the legislature, just to make sure that we are what we believe it says and what the expectations that were set by our elected officials that we're compliant. But those are really kind of minor clarity issues for us. But again, for some officers, and I've heard this from police chiefs around the state, they've had some of their officers who've been officers for a while that have decided they choose not to continue to police either in the state or police at all and are leaving. On the other hand, we hire a fair amount of people, and I'm seeing these new people we're hiring, and they're not going to know any different. They're not going to know policing in 1982 when Chief Phillips and I started. They're going to know policing going forward, and that's a good thing because policing should evolve to meet the needs of its community. So, you know, it is an expectation that we follow the law. We have an obligation to act within the law, and the officers that are out there truly believe strongly in following the law and doing the best they can for their community, even though there are some exceptions that we've seen around the country. And you know, nobody's harder on police than police themselves, because when officers do things that they shouldn't do, it just makes it harder on all of us. So you know, we are compliant with 217, and will obviously make sure that we are following the law as our legislator and governor has signed the law. And so we will make this work, absolutely, because we're committed to our profession.
Thank you. So we have Senator Fields, who is a sponsor of 217. I would love for each of you to be able to converse with her on 217. Maybe something that was, I'm also thinking too, like, you know, each of us has already read the bill, the law now, not the draft, but the actual law, and it has 27 amendments. So, because I know I had some, you know, I had some questions, but mine were resolved in those 27 amendments. But I have talked to people who live in my district, and they have not read the 27 amendments, and they were still thinking back to the draft. And so when a bill gets introduced, it's a rough draft, and it goes through committee and it gets amended, because everybody collaborates and talks about different things. So so I would love to give everyone the opportunity, because we do have Senator Fields here, and that's, you know, she's more than willing to answer any questions or maybe give clarity on some of the issues regarding 217. So please, you know, I welcome you to do so. Right, Senator Fields?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned the number of amendments, because when we first had that draft, we knew that there was going to be some modifications, but it happened so quickly because we were on recess because of the COVID-19 virus. And then when we came back to the Capitol, there was hundreds of people who were protesting, asking us to do something about police reform and police transparency, and about this whole Elijah McClain and George Floyd, and what can we do? And so we quickly came about the draft of the legislation within a week, maybe 3 days. I think it might have been 3 days. It started in the Senate. And then when we presented the bill to the committee, people were bringing up ideas that were justifiable. So when someone would say, well, this is not clear, me and the president, since we were the sponsor of the bill in the Senate, President Garcia and I, we said, yeah, that makes sense. We should make those modifications. And so we worked with our counterparts, and we did the best we could to make clarifications to the bill. It's not a perfect bill. I just had a stakeholder meeting. Was it this week? It might have been this week or last week. I think it was last week. And so there's still work that we need to do as it relates to definition and clarity as it relates to context. So I think you're going to see more legislation coming in 2021 to deal with the language, because, you know, we talked, I think one of the chiefs talked about training, and some of the language that we use in the bill was not clear to the practitioner, you know, that police officer that does the work day to day. So we need to kind of clarify and tune that up tone it up a little bit to see what we can do to create more clarity. But I'm pleased to hear the two chiefs say that it wasn't that radical. You know, the sky did not fall down. That a lot of the things that were suggested in the bill are already being done. And for us, I think, and for the community, I think it just presents a sense of saying that we believe in transparency, that we believe in integrity as it relates to policing, that we believe in everyone having, you know, a fair shot, equal justice under the law. As you probably know, this is what really breaks my heart today. There was a ruling that came back on the Breonna Taylor case today. And none of those officers are going to be charged at all for what I think was murder. And we know, like I think one of the chiefs says, sometimes mistakes happen. And this was a situation where she was at home in her bed, probably in her underwear. And there was a no-knock warrant where they rushed through their apartment, and she ended up dead. So I'm really somewhat traumatized a little bit because this woman was loved by her mother. And she was loved by all those that she came in contact with, all those who held her, all those who invested in her dreams. And so we know that sometimes in policing, these things happen. And what happens over the course of time, it appears to be when you're unarmed and you're Black, the opportunity for you end up being dead has a high probability. Maybe not in Johnstown, but let's say in any other location, I don't know where, whatever, but I'm seeing too many unarmed Black people, when they encounter the police, their bodies end up being dead because somehow they're perceived as being a threat. So when you see a Black person that seems out of their neighborhood, I don't know. I don't know, like if you're Trayvon Martin or whatever, you're in a gated community, you're walking down the street after having some iced tea and some Skittles, or you're sleeping in your bed, or let's say you're just walking through Central Park, just bird watching. People are calling the police on Black people because either they feel they're not worthy to be in that place and they're perceived as a threat. And sometimes they're, you know, when they encounter the police, they just end up dead.
So, you know, this actually, we were talking about this, and we were talking about like systemic racism in our country, right? And it's in our institutions, but it's been there throughout our history. And so here we are, we're recognizing it, and we're trying to move forward in all of these different areas, criminal justice reform. And so let me ask all of you this. And I think that the training is really important, but like you said, Senator Fields, you know, here's a person who is walking down the street, right? Not doing anything suspicious, just walking down the street. And they get called by an officer. Well, the officer is just doing his job because he got called out. So what I'm thinking is, should we be training dispatchers to be asking the right questions? Should we be, I don't know. I just feel like it's not just training our officers, but also maybe even like our, you know, our dispatchers. Because now I also realize too that you're always going to go out when you get a call because it's a liability. So how do we come up with a solution where we're not profiling, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I'm going to pose that to the chiefs. Well, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I completely understand that if there's a call, it is the law enforcement's duty to go and check it out, because otherwise, if something happens, it's liability, right? But how do we start training all of the different levels, right? The dispatcher, the officers, like all of the people that work within law enforcement, right? How do we do that so that so we change that culture, right? I don't know. I mean, we're not going to solve these issues tonight. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, I think it's important that we have these conversations because that's how we can move forward, right? So I'm just, would like to pose that to you. So I will let Chief Phillips go first.
Uh, these are very deep and very complex conversations that um, they obviously need to be had. Um, the majority of my career, I worked in a department that the population was roughly 60% African American and about 30% Hispanic. So my interactions when I worked at that department, I was the minority in the minority community. Moving to Johnstown, we have a very almost a non-existent minority. Our officers, when they make that contact, our control at the police side, I don't have any control whatsoever over the dispatch center here. It's run by the county. So my control is purely the officer that's on the street. The statement was made earlier that if the call is made, then we respond. Senator Fields brought up the incident that happened in Central Park, where a young man was walking through the park and a lady called the police on him. Those types of incidents, I don't know how we get around that as a society, other than I do like the idea that you had as far as the dispatcher, when they're receiving that call, instead of just taking the information that's being spit out over the phone, putting it into the complaint and dispatching an officer, maybe that training to ask the types of questions that need to be asked as to whether or not you've got a gentleman walking down the street that this person thinks he's suspicious. Maybe ask those particular questions on what he's doing that is actually against the law. It's not against the law to walk down the street. If somebody's walking down the street and they're dragging a dead dog behind them and they get an AR-15 strapped over their shoulder, that's somebody we might want to come out and take a look at and talk to.
Right.
Just somebody walking down the street, walking their dog or out with their kids, that bias, if you will, that member of the community might have, that puts them in the position where they feel they need to call the police and get the police involved. You have to put yourself in that position of that. If I'm walking down the street and a police officer stops me, I'm already going to be adversarial. Why are you stopping me? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just walking my dog. That contact from the very beginning has the propensity to turn into a bad stop. By bad, I mean there could be some kind of interaction. There could be complaints filed. Tempers are flaring, and those are the things that's the point where we need to have that de-escalation. Even if we make that contact with that person walking down the street and we tell them, "Hey, I got a call on you," that's not going to bring that person's anger down. They're still mad. They're getting stopped, and they're getting stopped on the belief that they're getting stopped because of the color of their skin. And you have to understand that would upset me. So I can understand how it would upset them. And that police officer saying, "Hey, I'm here because I have a call," that doesn't take that anger away.
Yeah.
Anger's still going to be there, and that officer has to deal with it, and the potential consequences of that contact. Because when somebody walking by with their cell phone camera and it gets thrown up on YouTube or one of the social media things, police officer stops this guy for no reason whatsoever, and they get in an argument on the side of the street. The police officers are racist. That officer has no idea. They're responding for the call for service. Now, if you take that call for service element out of there, and it's just an officer making a proactive contact, then yeah, that officer should be held accountable. What was your justification for stop? I think that's one of the things that I did appreciate about Senate Bill 217 was that component was put in there where, hey, we're not just going to indiscriminately stop people anymore. You better be able to justify it. You better be able to show that that probable cause that or that reasonable suspicion was there, and you can articulate it before you make that stop. So that takes that mindset away from the police officer. Well, this guy doesn't live in this neighborhood, I'm just going to stop him. So maybe, you know,
So maybe the dispatcher should be trained too, because then they can give the officer as much information as possible
yes.
when they go, right?
And I understand, you know, I know that dispatch centers have a hard time getting employees and keeping employees. And because of that, you know, they're overwhelmed with the number of calls coming in constantly. And it's difficult for them to ask those types of questions. But again, we're providing that public service, whether it's through dispatch, through EMS, through the police department, through the fire department. All of these public services are paid for by tax dollars. And if that community has an expectation that certain things be addressed, then let's have that discussion. Let's find out what we can do from that point where that call goes into dispatch, and we can find out whether or not this is just somebody that doesn't like a black man walking down the street, or does this person see something that generally causes alarm to that citizen that's calling, and they can tell us what that is before that dispatch is made and the officer responds. Whether or not that can happen, I don't know. I would like to think it could. Anyway, I've talked about it.
No, thank you so much. Chief Creager?
Well, and I think Senator Fields brings up some really valid points, and a lot of this is really clearly established in law, whether it be from the Supreme Court or Colorado state law. There's really three kinds of contacts that the police can engage in. One is just a consensual contact. Go up and say hello, how are you, and hey, you know, it's a consensual contact, and recognizing that that person can terminate that contact at any time and walk away, and that the officer's obligation is to allow them to walk away. If there's also reasonable suspicion stops where you have some articulable reason why a person is in the process of committing a crime, or they just committed a crime, and then you can proceed farther. And then probable cause is the level much higher than reasonable suspicion to make an arrest. And it's absolutely critical that officers understand those three levels in every single contact they have, so they aren't pushing a contact to a level where they're completely outside of the law. And so that's training. We do ask our dispatchers and train them to develop that reasonable suspicion for the officers, but over the phone, talking to a dispatcher, sometimes they get enough, sometimes they don't. When we get a call, and it happens not frequently, but sometimes we get a call and somebody's like, there's somebody walking down my street or parked in front of my house. I don't know them, they're whatever, and I want you to check them out. Well, we empower our officers that if you do not have that reasonable suspicion, then we ask them to call the person that's calling us and talk to them directly. Can you develop that reasonable suspicion? If they don't have it, if it's just, you know, somebody walking down the street and they're not doing anything wrong, then we're not going to, we empower the officer to tell them, nope, we're not going to come make a contact on that person. They may drive by just to make sure that they don't see anything, or there's nothing going on that they were unaware of. But we don't feel that we should engage in those kinds of contacts that have, let's face it, an implicit bias association with them. So now, do I get calls sometimes from our citizens that say, hey, that's not what I want? Yes. But, you know, again, it's not only their rights, but we have to balance their rights with the gentleman that's walking down the street. And if they're doing nothing wrong, they don't need the officer to engage them and interact with them. You know, we can stop by and say, hey, got a call on you, is everything okay? But generally we will, you know, unless we have that reasonable suspicion, we're not going to engage that person. Just simply because there's no point in it. It doesn't rise to the level of reasonable suspicion. And everybody has the right to walk down the street, regardless of who they are or you know, what qualities they have, and should be able to do so freely like in everybody else. So, and then, you know, looking at your statistics, we review our statistics all the time. Are we overrepresented in any place, and why? If we are, we try and keep track of those. We look at them every single year to see if there's anything that goes on. We look at every single complaint. So anybody makes a complaint to the Broomfield Police Department, it gets investigated and reviewed all the way up through me. Every use of force is investigated immediately and then reviewed all the way up through me, including the body cameras. We initiate probably 80% of all of our investigations internally, just based on our observations, and we don't actually receive a complaint from the citizen. But that's ways to make sure that your culture of your organization is one of integrity and accountability. It's not just, well, if I smooth this over, the person won't complain to me and they're never going to know about it. We're going to know about it because we're watching it, and we're going to try and identify any problems early in your career and stop you from doing those things so that you can have a successful career free of you know, some of the issues that we've seen across this country, but more importantly, that you're not out there engaging in behaviors with our public that are outside of the law.
Thank you. So we're not going to have time to get through all these questions, unfortunately. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's your training like? Like, how do you pick your officers? Like, what is the criteria? I mean, I would think as a community member, it would be very vigorous, right? Like, it's not something that you take lightly. You don't take every applicant for whatever reason. Can you walk us through briefly what that looks like? Let's just say I wanted to apply to be an officer.
Well, our process is probably a lot shorter than Chief Creager's. We don't have a lot of open positions. When we do, we look at the applications that we've received up to that point. We advertise in many different trade publications, the internet, Facebook, trying to attract candidates. And then we go through the applications. That's our first step. We have a review of the applications. That's usually conducted by myself, commander, and sergeants. If we see one that we think rises to the level that we're looking for, that person is invited to come in for an interview. I have an interview panel that I use where I use a detective and 2 of the police officers. Both of those police officers are field training officers. And though we have a series of questions that we ask them during that interview process, where we're trying to find out whether or not this person would be a good fit for, and we're a small agency, we call it our family, will they fit in with our family? So these questions are designed to find out what their mindset is, what their background is, what their personality is, and whether or not they agree with the philosophy and the mission of our department. If they do well on that, then we send them off for a psychological evaluation. We wait for that psychological evaluation to come back. There's a background investigation that's going on at the same time. Our background investigators will contact anybody that they've had contact with, family members, neighbors, ex-employers. We review their training records. We look at everything that we can possibly look at, find out if there's any types of issues with that individual that we're thinking about forward. If they pass their psychological exam and they pass their background investigation, the next step is they have a one-on-one integrity interview with our commander. There's a series of questions that they're asked. If there's any red flags that pop up during those questions, they're disqualified. If they pass that integrity test, then the next step would be to have an interview with me. My interviews are less formal. I want to see, talk to this individual about things that aren't typically police related. I want to find out who they are, what they're about, what their background is, and talk to them and find out where they see themselves 5 years from now. Are we going to train them and to just watch them go to Broomfield, which has happened. Uh, but yeah, we want to know everything we can possibly know. And if they are successful through that process and we feel that they would be a good fit with our agency, then we give them that condition. So that's our process. We don't get a lot of applications. And I've held positions open for 5, 6, 7 months at a time because I want to make sure that the person that we do hire is going to be a fit for us and our community.
Thank you. Chief Creager?
So, there's the steps are probably somewhat similar, but I just want to reiterate what Chief Phillips said. The first thing and foremost is that the organization, the chief, has clearly defined the values of the organization. You hire to your values, and those values are tested and evaluated against every applicant at every stage in the hiring process. It's kind of part and parcel why it takes about 4 months from the time you have an opening to the point you're going to make a job offer. We obviously do the normal resume and application process, and then look for the minimum qualifications, those kinds of things. But then their interview, their first interview, is our best employees. Our employees are the ones that are really the ones that are the holders of our values, and the assessment of our values. If you don't make it past them, then you're not making it anywhere else in this process. Then we do the typical things: 2 separate psychologicals, integrity interviews, background processes, all of those types of things, because we're looking to see, is this somebody that has, we don't want somebody with a flash temper or has a history of can't deal with conflict well. Those kinds of things are really where their psychological examinations are really useful for us. In the background process, we talk to all the employers, and I mandate if they're a previous police officer that we actually go and review their files. I don't want to hear from some other police department, well, this is what's in there, because sometimes you're not getting the whole understanding of what's in their background file, their IA file, their training file, their discipline file, and all that. COVID's challenged us a little bit with that because it makes it harder to do it, but we want a complete understanding of who we're hired. So when the entire file is put together, it's probably, I don't know, 110 pages in length, if you will, and then that proceeds all the way up the chain of command. And at any point, whether it be the sergeant of our recruiting unit can indicate that no, this person isn't going to fit well in Broomfield, the commander, the deputy chief, and me. And we have turned down people that have very good careers in other organizations, and I'm glad for them. They're just not a fit for the culture that we have here, and that's where that cultural piece of each organization is so key. We all do basically the same thing. We respond to calls, we arrest bad guys, we meet with our communities, we do community-oriented policing and all that, but it's how you do it and what your priorities are as an organization and what your expectation of approach to your community is and to the people you arrest. We use a model called LEAD. It's listen and explain with equity and dignity. It was developed out of President Obama's 21st century recommendations for policing. I expect my officers, you don't just arrest somebody and haul them to jail. You tell them what you're going to do. You explain what's going to happen. You listen to what they have to say. It may not change what your outcome is, but at least they're going to understand what it is that you're going to do. And that oftentimes diffuses a situation because they understand what's going on. So it's really about setting those organizational values and that organizational culture and then hiring to your culture. That I believe is how you ensure that you have a police department that is responsive to its community and meets the expectations of its community.
Thank you. Amy, did you want to add to that?
And I think there's a component of this that the general public doesn't really know, and that's that in the last couple of years, and Chiefs, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's harder and harder to hire police officers, and there is less and less pool of people becoming police officers. And this has been a hard season for everybody, but this has been an especially hard season for law enforcement officers, for firefighters, and for their families. I mean, we think that some of this has calmed down, but I think it was 3 days ago, there was a police officer's house in New Jersey that was shot up with him and his wife home. They were both officers. They were on leave with their 10-day-old child. And that just happened just a few days ago. This isn't calming down either. It's not an easy time to be a police officer in any regards, and it's hurting their families, and it's hard for their kids, and sometimes that gets glazed over, but the pool of officers and people applying is very small, and it's not what it was years ago.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, I'll let you speak.
I think something that's a stark reminder for me, the first position that I had open when I got hired here to be the chief 10 years ago, we had one position, and I put out a call for applications, and I got 68 certified police officer applications for that one position, which is a lot for a small agency. I just filled a position. I filled 2 positions this year, and in the entire year, I received a total of 7 applications. So the amount of applications that we're getting are dwindling, and then if you take those applications that you're getting, of the 7 applications that we received, 3 were immediately disqualified because they were coming from another department where they were either in the process of being investigated for something, or they were let go by another agency. To me, that's a huge red flag. So we have a very small pond in which to fish in, and we're competing with a lot of other agencies for those police officers. I talked to a young man who 3 years ago, he was going through the police academy. He lives here in town. And I used to go into the post office, and he'd stop me and say, Chief, I'm almost done with the academy. I can't wait. I'm going to be a police officer. I want to work for Johnstown. I've been up here all my life. And I stopped seeing him. I ran into him about 4 months ago at the post office. And I asked him, I said, hey, when are you going to come down and put in that application? He said he changed his mind. He changed what he was doing in college and decided he was going to go into computers because his family was worried about his safety. That really hit home with me because this young man was really excited about becoming a Johnstown police officer, and that changed. So again, getting back to what we were discussing earlier about having those conversations need to be had before we get to a point on either side of the conversation where we can't fix it. And I don't think we're there yet. I think that there are a lot of steps being taken. I hope that we can recover from this and we can get that pendulum to kind of slow down and level off, and we can move forward. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I do think that, I think people need to realize that police officers take their lives into their hands every single day when they go to work. So that is something that we all recognize, at least on this call, I believe we all recognize that. And I do think we have to continue these conversations. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to also bring up something that is, very controversial. But I think that we are spreading our police officers thin. And in regards to the calls that you're having to deal with, when I talked about this earlier in this discussion about the mental health calls, about the substance abuse calls. And so, how do you feel about divesting some funds into social services to take that pressure off police officers so the police officers can just do, like Chief Creager said, arrest the bad guys?
I'm gonna give a real short comment on this so that the chief can chime in. We just had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the Weld County chiefs. It's a month,
With the
And
Will County?
chiefs, all the chiefs in Weld County, we
Okay.
meet once a month. That topic of discussion came up, and what I thought what was a kind of an eye-opening statement by one of the chiefs. His spouse works for one of the mental health facilities, one of the major mental health facilities here in northern Colorado, and according to him, he went home and talked to his wife about the mental health counseling, going out and taking up some of this responsibility that is falling on police throughout the years. And she said, I wish somebody would come and talk to us, because we don't want that. We don't want to be the one who want to respond to that. That's not our job. That's not what we trained for. That's not what we went to school for. And again, that's just one small example. But before I would jump on and say, yeah, that's something that needs to happen, I think there would have to be a lot of discussion, and those stakeholders would have to be brought to the table, because from what I'm hearing from them, they haven't been. And that would be something that I think we need to accomplish before we say, okay, we're going to take funding away from the police department, and social workers are going to start going to homeless encampments or domestic violence calls or whatever component that they're looking at taking away from law enforcement response. That would be my concern.
Okay, thank you.
I'll
Thank
step
you.
out, let the chief talk.
I appreciate that. I
I've
appreciate your
been-
perspective.
So I've been pretty involved in this issue for a number of years, both here in the state and across the country, on mental health and substance abuse and homelessness and those kinds of issues. And it's universal. We're all struggling with it. We have a co-responder program. So we have mental health workers that will respond out with our officers. And we find that to be hugely successful. But you got to keep in mind that by the time the police are called, these people are in crisis. It's a dangerous situation. And so we train our officers in crisis intervention and those kinds of things. We calm the situation, and then we bring the co-responder in, and we can do a soft handoff to a mental health worker, but the mental health worker isn't going to go by themselves to start with. We average about 40 calls a month involving mental health, very little criminality associated with mental health. If there's some low-level crime, we can divert that, so that's not a big issue anyways, and quite honestly, we want to divert them. What we do see, however, is the number of times that people have to go to the hospital is significantly declines. The number of forceful encounters with us significantly declines by using this. And so it's an unbelievable benefit. So I would say that it's a great conversation. I don't think it's a one or the other, but whether it's a collaboration. Mental health workers that want to work nights and weekends and holidays are a little hard to find. But they just want to know they're safe, and so our co-responder program has been hugely successful. And I think it started as a police initiative here in Broomfield through some grant dollars that the state made available, but we're transitioning it more to our human services because we're building that collaboration with our human services department because they're better at running that mental health component than we are. And so we're really collaborating with them to do that. Just like in child investigations, they have social workers that are probably better than us. So building that collaboration, same thing in the jail. We're one of the few jails that we have full-time mental health people available in the jail. They'll talk to anybody that has any problems. We build an exit plan for every single person released from the Broomfield jail. We give them a 60-day supply of meds when they leave the jail to help them stay, so they have their medication and they don't go back into crisis. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do working together and not be, the one or the other, because there's, and to Chief Phillips' point, there are pieces in that are getting lost, and those are very important pieces that have to be a part of the conversation. But I think the value there is the police don't have to do it all. And there are people out there that can work with us, and we can divert people. We can avoid confrontations with people. We can get them the help that they need through that collaboration.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Say quickly too, do you remember when COVID happened originally and the schools shut down and memes went around and people were asking questions of where are our kids going to eat? Who's going to watch our kids in the day? And all these things. And all of a sudden it was like a light bulb went off of this is how much we were depending on schools and teachers, and we didn't realize it. And I feel like that's almost the same conversation about to happen with the police department. Look at how much we're depending on the police department to do mental health, help with racism, everything that we put on their plate. It's a lot that we're asking police officers to solve right now. And so I think the conversation needs to be had of what does that fair balance look like and who needs to be brought in. And I hope the conversation also includes mental health for first responders as well. So we keep them strong and safe and the time they need to heal from everything they deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point, Amy. Thank you. Senator Fields, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, it's really refreshing to hear the two chiefs talk about how they recruit and retain law enforcement officers, because I think you do have to be very mindful and selective about who you bring into the culture to make sure they're a good fit. So it was good to hear that background and that explanation. But what I know about policing, and I celebrate law enforcement, that is a calling. And so it's like almost being a nurse. Not everyone's set up for being on the front line and protecting and serving and doing crime prevention. Not everyone's called to do that. But when they all call to do that, if you have the passion to do that kind of work, then those are the kind of people that we want to see on the front line. So when I hear things like, you know, people are leaving the workforce or something like that, that's a shame, but that happens in all occupations. It happens to teachers that are fatigued. It happens to healthcare professionals. It happens maybe to postal workers, because sometimes you get tired and sometimes it's the work you don't want to do anymore. But I don't think we should blame it on legislation. I think it's what's in your heart. It's what in your mindset. And sometimes you're just not up for the job because the job is very, very complicated. And you have to have a compassion, and you have to have the empathy and the desire to do the work. And not everyone's up to it. And so I don't think we can blame it on Senate Bill 217 or anything else. It's an individual choice. And people choose what they want to do and what they have the desire to do. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. And this whole piece about training is that some things you just can't legislate, and there's some things you just can't train. It's like having the passion. Either you're going to do the work ethically and with integrity, or you're going to be shaped by the culture and the mindset within the organization that you work in. And then you're guided and shaped by the environment that you're in. So this conversation has been a good one, but it's lopsided because we have not really heard from the community voice. We haven't heard from someone that has been a victim of crime and how they've navigated the police infrastructure and either how they were able to get justice or how they wasn't. So this is a good conversation, but we need to have more dialogue with people that really have been exposed or confronted. I mean, that's how we really learn, is by having rich conversations about, not between us, but about people who have engaged in the police department and what they feel. So these chiefs can learn, that they can use the data points, the complaints. I know you said there wasn't any complaints, or maybe there are few complaints. You look at the complaints to drive and inform your organization. I think that's wonderful. But this conversation needed to have the voice of the people as it relates to those who have been victims or those who have been contacted by the police and how they felt they were treated with dignity or with not it. But
So then this
that's
is
what
just
I have to
the
add.
first conversation of many. And, but I mean, well, we can't control who actually came on tonight either though, Senator Fields. Like, I mean, we didn't have anyone that had a circumstance to share with us that perspective, which is unfortunate because I agree with you. We do need to hear everything. And
I know victims. I'm a victim myself. And there are victims in your community that you represent. It's just, and they're organizations. They're called victim advocates. They're there to help people navigate when they've been harmed by crime. It's not that difficult to get them involved. All you gotta do is really contact the police department and talk to those people that are in charge of victim services and say, we're gonna have this dialogue. Is anybody willing and comfortable enough to share? We need to hear those stories because those stories belong to the community. We all need to hear what it's like to be a victim and how they were supported or they received justice. And I know you can't control it, but you can help facilitate them being comfortable enough to be able to participate, because we all get better when we learn from other people's stories.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, then I guess we need to have a part 2.
Yes.
And I will invite the chiefs to maybe work on that with an advocate that could possibly bring someone on that could speak to us about their experience. I think that would make it more rich, this conversation, absolutely. So I appreciate that, thank you. Well, again, we're out of time. Thank you so much, all of you, for being part of the discussion. And I hope that we will have more discussions about this because it's a very, very critical and important topic. And that's the only way we're gonna move forward. So I really appreciate you both being on here, and Amy and Senator Fields, thank you. And thank you to our guests and anyone who's watching us on Facebook. Thank you. Have a nice night.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Chief.